Hey everyone, welcome back to that 90s pod. Today we should be like throwing it back to, well, a group that just totally embodies like the whole spirit of the 90s, the Spice Girls. So whether you're like cramming for some 90s trivia night, or finally giving into your friend who's like, we have to watch Spice World, or maybe you're just curious about this like totally iconic group, get ready to zigga your way through this deep dive with us. We're gonna be like unpacking why the Spice Girls mattered so much, not just in the 90s, but even like now. And hey, if you're digging this blast from the past, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share the 90s love with your friends. All right, so let's set the stage. It's 1996. Britpop is like king. The internet is this like weird new thing we're all trying to figure out. Then bam, Wannabe just explodes onto the scene and the world changes. I'm so excited to have our expert here with us who can give us some like amazing context on all of this 90s goodness. So what was it about that like specific moment in time that allowed a group like the Spice Girls to just become this phenomenon?
I think what's fascinating is that the Spice Girls, they didn't just like arrive, they like erupted into a world that was like totally primed for their, brand of like vibrant energy, if you think about it. Like we were just emerging from the Cold War. Technology was advancing at this crazy pace. And there was this like collective feeling of possibility, this yearning for something new and different. And the Spice Girls, with their like bold personalities and their in-your-face message of empowerment, they just perfectly captured that spirit. They weren't just singers, they were like a cultural earthquake.
Okay, so let's talk about Wannabe for a sec. That song wasn't just catchy, it was a full-blown anthem. And it went way beyond just like wanting to have fun with your friends.
Yeah.
It was about female friendship as like a source of power, about declaring your independence. I remember feeling so seen by that song. So what was it about Wannabe and like more broadly girl power that resonated so deeply with so many young people, especially girls at that time?
Girl power was brilliant in its simplicity because it tapped into something very real, this desire for like a genuine connection and self-expression, especially among young women who were often told to be quiet and play nice. And the Spice Girls totally flipped that script. They were loud, they were unapologetically themselves, and they encouraged like everyone to embrace their individuality. And it wasn't just talk, they lived it. Sporty, scary Baby Ginger, and posh, each Spice Girl had a distinct personality, a unique way of being. They weren't afraid to be different. And that was incredibly powerful.
And that leads to a really interesting point. Girl power wasn't just a marketing slogan. It became like a cornerstone of third-wave feminism. Can you talk a bit more about how that happened? What were the core tenets of third-wave feminism? And how did the Spice Girls embody them?
So third-wave feminism was all about reclaiming femininity, celebrating diversity, and challenging the idea of a single feminist narrative. It was about individual expression, sex positivity, and challenging traditional power structures. And the Spice Girls, whether they meant to or not, embodied many of these ideas. They were all about owning their sexuality, celebrating their differences, and demanding to be taken seriously.
Yeah, they weren't afraid to be bold and speak their minds, which was so refreshing at the time. I mean, before them, girl groups weren't exactly known for their outspokenness or like dominating the charts. So how did their success actually change the landscape of the music industry for other female artists?
Oh, their impact was huge. Before the Spice Girls, the music industry was largely dominated by boy bands and male solo artists. Girl groups were often seen as disposable, manufactured products. But the Spice Girls, with their attitude, their talent, and their massive global success, proved that girls could rock just as hard, if not harder, than the boys. They paved the way for artists like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Destiny's Child, showing the world that female artists could be commercially successful and critically acclaimed. They changed the game.
It's crazy to think about how much they accomplished in such a short amount of time. But before we jump ahead too much, let's take a quick second to remind everyone to subscribe to that 90s pod and tell your friends. We've got so much more 90s goodness to share, and we don't want you to miss a single beat. Now back to the Spice Girls. Their influence wasn't just limited to music, was it? I mean, they were fashion icons. They had their own movie. They were absolutely everywhere.
Oh, their cultural reach was phenomenal. They weren't just singers. They were style icons, trendsetters. Platform shoes, miniskirts, tracksuits. They made it cool to be bold and expressive with your clothing choices. And their movie, Spice World, while maybe not a cinematic masterpiece, perfectly captured their larger-than-life personalities and became an instant cult classic. That double-decker bus became synonymous with their spirit, their friendship, their zigga-zigga attitude.
Absolutely. I remember trying to copy all their fashion choices. The platform shoes, the pigtails, everything, and that bus. Who didn't want to ride around in a giant, colorful double-decker bus with their best friends? It was all about fun, friendship,
and freedom.
Speaking of which, their reach extended far beyond the UK. So what were some of the surprising places they became hugely popular?
Their success was truly global. They were massive in Japan, Brazil, all over Asia and South America. Their music transcended language barriers and cultural differences, proving that their message of empowerment and friendship was truly universal. It's remarkable how they managed to connect with audiences on such a global scale.
It really is. Their impact goes so much deeper than we often realize. Okay, before we move on, can you share any, fun facts or trivia about the Spice Girls that most people might not know?
Well, here's a little tidbit that might surprise you. Did you know there was almost a sixth Spice Girl?
Wait, seriously, tell me more.
Yeah. A singer named Michelle Stevenson was actually part of the original lineup. She left the group before they signed their record deal. Can you imagine how different things might have been if she'd stayed?
That's wild to think about how,
Yeah.
one small change could have just totally altered the course of pop culture history.
Yeah.
But clearly the five we know and love, they were destined to be the icons they are. Speaking of iconic, their rise to fame was, meteoric.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, all good things must come to an end, at least for a while. So what led to their hiatus in the early 2000s?
Like any group that achieves that kind of massive fame, there were internal pressures and creative differences that eventually became too much to handle. They're also incredibly young when they were woo! Thrust into the spotlight. And that kind of intense scrutiny, it can take its toll.
It must have been incredibly difficult to navigate that level of fame. At such a young age, I remember being devastated when they announced their break. It felt like the end of an era. But thankfully, as we all know, the Spice Girls didn't stay gone forever. They reunited, they toured, and they even released new music. So what was it about their reunion that resonated so deeply with fans, even years later?
I think their reunion tour, it was more than just a nostalgia trip. It was a celebration of their enduring impact on music and culture, their message of empowerment and friendship. It was just as relevant, if not more so, in the 2000s. And let's be honest, their music is just plain fun. It's impossible not to sing and dance along.
Absolutely. I was lucky enough to catch one of their reunion shows, and it was pure magic, seeing them back together on stage, belting out those iconic hits. It was like stepping back in time, but also a reminder of how their music continues to inspire and empower. And even today, their influence can be seen in so many contemporary artists.
Oh, it's undeniable. Artists like Little Mix Fifth Harmony, even global superstars like Dua Lipa and Ariana Grande, have all cited the Spice Girls as inspirations. They took that torch of girl power and ran with it, incorporating it into their own music and personas.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Girl power in the 90s, it was about breaking down barriers and demanding equality. But how has that concept evolved in the decades since the Spice Girls first burst onto the scene?
The evolution of girl power has been fascinating to witness. It's become more nuanced, more inclusive, more intersectional. It's no longer just about girls sticking together. It's about embracing diversity, challenging gender norms, and creating a world where everyone can feel empowered to be themselves.
I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of their legacy. They started a conversation that continues to evolve and expand. It's a conversation that's more important than ever in today's world. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that the Spice Girls weren't perfect. They faced criticism, controversies, and their message. It wasn't always universally embraced.
Yeah, you're right. It's crucial to view them within the context of their time. Some of their choices might be viewed differently through a modern lens. They were products of the 90s, and the 90s had its own set of social and cultural norms.
And their imperfections, their willingness to push boundaries and challenge those norms is also part of what made them so compelling. They weren't afraid to be messy, to make mistakes, to be human,
They sparked debates, challenged conventions, and forced people to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, and that's a testament to their authenticity. They were never afraid to be themselves, flaws and all. And that resonated with millions of fans who saw themselves reflected
Yeah.
in their music
Yeah.
and their message.
Yeah.
Yeah, that realness, that vulnerability
Yeah.
is something that I think we all crave, whether it's in our music or in our lives. And speaking of craving more 90s goodness, let's take a quick break to remind our amazing listeners to hit that subscribe button and spread the 90s love by sharing that 90s pod with their friends. The more the merrier, and we love having you all along for the ride. Now back to our deep dive into the world of the Spice Girls. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Spice Girls, what do you think their ultimate legacy is? How do we measure their impact beyond chart positions and album sales.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Expert speaker. How do you measure the impact of a cultural phenomenon like Spice Girls? Expert speaker. It goes so much deeper than just the music expert speaker. It's about the conversations they started, expert speaker, the barriers they broke, expert speaker, and the millions of people worldwide who felt seen and empowered by their message.
I think their legacy is about inspiring a generation to embrace their individuality, host speaker, to celebrate their differences, host speaker, and to never be afraid to use their voice as host speaker. It's about friendship, host speaker, self-love, host speaker, and standing up for what you believe in.
And what's amazing is that their message, it continues to resonate today. Expert speaker. We see it in the artists they inspired, expert speaker,
Yeah.
the conversations around gender equality and representation, expert speaker, and the ongoing push for a more inclusive and accepting world.
It's like they planted a seed, host speaker. And that seed is just grown into something so much bigger than anyone could have imagined, host speaker. It's about continuing to challenge the status quo, host speaker, push boundaries, host speaker, and to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to zig-a-zig their way through life.
Exactly. Expert speaker. The Spice Girls showed us that pop music could be fun. Expert speaker, empowering expert speaker, and even a revolutionary expert speaker. They reminded us that it's okay to be loud expert speaker, to be different expert speaker, to be unapologetically yourself expert speaker. And that's a message that will never go out of style.
So true. Host speaker. Well, that was a whirlwind trip back to the 90s. Host speaker. We covered so much ground, host speaker. From wannabe to Spice World host speaker. From platform shoes to the global impact of girl power host speaker, we explored their music host speaker, their fashion host speaker, their feminism host speaker, and their lasting impact on pop culture.
Yeah, we laughed expert speaker, we reminisced expert speaker, and maybe even learned a few things along the way, expert speaker. But as with any deep dive expert speaker, it leaves us with even more to ponder.
How has girl power evolved in the decades since the Spice Girls first burst onto the scene? Host speaker. What would a modern-day Spice Girls look and sound like?
And how can we continue to carry their message of empowerment and inclusivity forward into the future? Expert speaker. These are questions I hope you'll continue to think about long after this episode ends.
Because the conversation they started is far from over, host speaker. It's an ongoing dialogue about representation, host speaker, self-love, host speaker, and the power of music to bring people together.
And on that note, expert speaker, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Spice Girls expert speaker. We hope you learned something new, expert speaker, maybe even felt a bit nostalgic, expert speaker, and most importantly, expert speaker, that you're feeling empowered to spice up your own life.
Keep the spirit of the 90s alive, host speaker. And remember, friendship never ends, host speaker. And don't forget to subscribe to That 90s Pod and tell all your friends so they can join the party too, host speaker. Until next time, stay groovy.